Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers podcast. And I'm so honored to have Dr. Will Tuttle. Dr. Tuttle, you were here in the very beginning of our podcast a year ago, and I don't think we've had a conversation since, other than in our circles for the World Peace Diet.
Right. Yeah. Great to see you and great to be here. Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you. And so we're meeting again because you have a brand new book, Food for Freedom, Reclaiming Our Health and Rescuing Our World. I'd just like to read a little bit about how it's described in your book on Amazon. Not that I'm promoting Amazon. I'm sure it's sold in all kinds of places, but sometimes
Yes.
you have to be part of a system and to bring good about. So Food for Freedom, Reclaiming Our Health and Rescuing Our World is an exploration into the underlying cultural food narrative in our society and how they have eroded our freedom, health, spirituality, and awareness. It aims to provide alternatives that promote these qualities and to offer a wide range of practical steps we can each take to reinvigorate and liberate our lives and our culture. And if you want to find Food for Freedom, it's on many venues, and Dr. Will Tuttle will talk about that. And thank you. You know, I studied with Dr. Gabriel Cousens, and the one thing that really brought me to him, well, two things really, is that whenever I showed up for an Essene gathering or teachings in Patagonia, Arizona, when the center was still around, he would always ask at the end of a question that we had, did I answer your question? And if we didn't feel like we were completely understood or that we completely understood his response, he would keep at it, no matter how full the room was, no matter how many questions there were. He would stay with it until you really felt that your question was answered. And he would never give the woes or the hardship or the suffering of the world without a solution. And so it was a very empowered way of teaching. And that's what I feel from this book. You're saying that I am going to give practical steps to help us out of this old narrative of death, disease, and destruction. So thank you, Will. Take it away, and love to share a little bit about your book. And and hope everyone will find, their way to these pages.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the thing. And that's really the underlying idea in this new book, Food for Freedom. It's very similar, basically the same as the underlying idea in the World Peace Diet. Also, the good news that all of us have this physical body that does not essentially or fundamentally require any animals to be imprisoned and abused to get all the nutrients that we need, right? So I've been a vegan now for 44 years, and I'm one of millions of people who are long-term vegans who are thriving and doing great. And so when we understand that we don't need to harm animals, imprison them, grow massive amounts of corn and soy and alfalfa, typically all genetically engineered, cut down rainforests, destroy ecosystems, and then fill our bodies with toxic animal-based foods, which really are hard for us. I mean, the driving force behind most of the diseases that we're having are toxins, and a lot of them come through the food. Animal-based proteins, saturated fat, cholesterol, and so forth. So the good news is it's not necessary, right? But the question is, well, why is it when people hear this, they don't just say, great, I'm on board, and that's it, and just switch right over and start eating whole, organic, plant-based foods like you and I are both doing, and again, millions of other people are doing. And the World Peace Diet goes into that question at a deep level, spiritually, psychologically, anthropologically, historically. The momentum of 10,000 years of animal agriculture has created this underlying fundamental organization. And the thing is, we as human beings, and I think as all living beings, it's the same thing, that you don't question your parents' food. It's like that's the most important teaching that comes through the parents to offspring. And so when someone comes along and starts questioning that, all kinds of alarm bells go off in people's minds, and they think, If I eat differently, I'm not going to be part of the tribe. I'm not going to be part of the family. Plus I love it's so good, bacon. So there's all these different reasons. So the thing is with Food for Freedom, which is almost 20 years after the World Peace Diet, we've seen a lot of changes in our society. In many ways, what I've been warning about, Madeline and I have traveled, and we've given probably, I would say, more lectures promoting vegan living than any human beings ever, in the sense that, over 4,000 lectures all over the United States and over 50 countries. So we've just been working to share this message. And what I've seen is that what we've been warning about, which is the fact that whatever we sow, we will reap. And so when we insist on sowing seeds of sexual abuse and forced medication and enslavement, millions of times every day, to beings who have interests that are as important to them as my interests are to me, we are inevitably going to be reaping the seeds that we've been sowing. And that's what we see happening. And we see, and especially in the last 4 years with the whole so-called pandemic, forced medication, tracking, and lockdowns, and all the things that we do to animals. The same things that we've been doing to animals, we see now happening to us. And again, I've been warning that if we're going to insist on having a mentality that reduces living beings to mere commodities that are bought and sold by the pound, that's the essence of materialism, to reduce beings' conscious awareness to just a material thing. And that is a form of violence. And so when we do that to them, we find somehow the same thing happening to us. There are beings that look at humanity in many ways merely as livestock. And so I talk quite a bit in the World Peace Diet about the system as it has emerged, and how essential it is for us to question everything that comes through the mainstream media, that comes from the medical establishment, that comes from governmental agencies, that comes from the educational system, because it's all massaged and programmed and really in many ways captured by the plutocrats. Plutocrats are the super wealthy people who basically have, through wealth, created the ability for themselves to control the society. One of the things that I've realized is that wealth really does translate directly into power. And the main kind of power it translates into is power over the narrative. The narrative, that the story that we tell in our society about what's going on, that's in our minds, that we learn, that we better be careful because there's germs everywhere and they might get us. That narrative. And so I really go in depth into the psychology of this. Why are we attracted to that narrative? Why does that narrative resonate for us? And not only besides the fact that it's just hammered continually in our on TV and in school and everywhere, that germs cause disease, and we don't look at the other side of that, which is that our consciousness is really responsible for the quality of the physical vehicle that we're expressing through. And so we're taught that we don't have any power. We're just at the mercy of these forces, environmental forces, mainly these beings, like these invisible, hidden, malevolent beings, that there's millions of viruses and bacteria that can harm us. And that ties right in with the fact that what we are, each one of us as an individual, we are a hidden malevolent force ourselves. If I go into the restaurant or to a grocery store and take out my wallet and pay someone for some animal flesh or dairy products or eggs, because I want to eat that, then that person puts into motion a whole series of events that definitely cause a cow, pig, chicken, fish, some animal to be brutally abused, very often sexually abused and killed, and the babies are killed. So I am this invisible killer and harmer, abuser. And yet, but I don't think about it. I don't think of that. I just need to eat some chicken, and so I don't think of myself as harming anyone, because it's normalized. Everything is normalized, and I think it's the same thing. As I looked into this in more detail, I saw that we're attracted to that because we are that. And so because we are acting violently, we project. Carl Jung talks about the shadow, the psychological dimension of ourselves, which is really what we are, but which we deny. No. We're good, kind, loving people who just like a good steak and cheeseburger. But there are these others over there. And so we project, and that shadow not only projects, but it forces us to be unable to really see what we actually are and the consequences of our actions. And so it's very interesting that we have about 8 billion people on the planet. And when you look carefully, you can see pretty clearly that there's about 8,000 people who are super rich and who gather at Davos for the World Economic Forum, and these are basically the people who own most of the financial institutions. They run them, and they have the investments that actually own them. So they own the stock and of financial institutions, of large corporations, the high politicians, the people that run the universities, the people who run the media and movies. All these people, they know each other and they gather together, and their interests all converge together. They have the same interests. And so you could say it's a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy when interests converge. When interests converge, then people work together to make sure that their interests are fulfilled, and they have the power. So that 8,000 people, that's 1/10,000th of 1% of humanity, is basically completely controlling the narrative and the actual lives of everyone else. And that's the situation we're in. And that's why it's so dangerous, because these people have been able to accumulate through technology, through science and technology, the capacity to control the narrative of everyone else. And these narratives are not in our best interest. Of course, the main narrative is you need to eat animal foods to be healthy. Once you get that narrative into people, then you've got slaves, because when you enslave others, you sow the seeds to be a slave yourself. So that's very important as part of it. But there's other narratives that go along with that. And so I talk about that. I talk about the different narratives. One of the narratives I just mentioned also is the germ theory, that we are always potentially being harmed by germs. So we need to go to the doctor and get drugs and we need to vaccinate, right? We need to inject people with things to protect them from these viruses and bacteria. And one of the things that's interesting is, like, when I was a kid in the 1960s and 50s, the rate of chronic disease was only about 6 or 7%. In other words, people that had to take drugs just to kind of get through the day, pharmaceuticals. And today, it's about 67%. About 2/3 of the people have chronic disease. So they're taking pharmaceuticals like on a daily basis, probably for the rest of their life. And so the pharmaceutical industry has been able, over these decades, to gradually accumulate narrative control and actually capture the FDA and the CDC and all these, and the United Nations and all these organizations, so that instead of spending our money to really help people have more, better housing and more sanitation and better quality food, it's all on injecting them, spending billions and billions of dollars on these really toxic injections. And so, as vegans, of course, we should never be in favor of something that causes terrible suffering to animals, like these pharmaceutical medications. I mean, Big Pharma, I've understood this for 40 years as an animal rights activist, that Big Pharma is the biggest enemy of animals. Millions of animals, tens or hundreds of millions of animals, are actually just tortured to death in experiments, testing. So that's one thing. But another thing is the fact that there's over 10,000 different drugs and hormones that are used on cows and pigs and chickens and other animals so we have literally billions of animals who are getting massive amounts of drugs injected into their bodies, and then we eat their flesh. Just lately I just read that this bird flu, which they're saying is a terrible thing, Bill Gates and these other people who have invested big time into the pharmaceutical industry, they've now decided to vaccinate 30 billion chickens in the United States, right? Vaccinate every one of them. I mean, you know how much money they're going to be making doing that? And then, of course, all those toxic chemicals are going into the flesh of these chickens, and people are going to be eating that. And then people get sick. We have to understand that sickness is profitable. The worst nightmare of the, what I call the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex is people like me who have not gone to a doctor or to a drugstore in the last 50 years. And I think, they want to try to keep people thinking that we need to go to them to get to be healthy. And the more chemicals and pharmaceuticals that are in the environment, the more toxins are in people's bodies, and the more they're harmed by that. And so one of the ways, the main way really, is the childhood injections, right? If you give childhood injections, what they really want is not to have this really be trackable. It's called plausible deniability. So, in other words, if you force little babies to be injected with injections that have animal tissues, and they have monkey and horse and pig and cow and chicken and camel and all these really bizarre cellular lines, as well as aborted human babies. You're injecting that right into the bodies of these little babies when they're just born, for the first 4, 5, 6, 7 years of their lives. And so you're just wreaking havoc on these little kids. But it doesn't, sometimes it shows up right away. I mean, we have autism rates are through the roof. I mean, we have lots of, sudden death of little kids, or that's, SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And these are all now being tracked, as well as autism, to these injections that kids are routinely getting. And so people are starting to wake up about this. But this is something the pharmaceutical industry, they have no liability, and they make billions of dollars. And the Supreme Court and the law of the land is that these injections are unavoidably unsafe. Since they are unavoidably unsafe, then the vaccine manufacturing companies cannot be held liable, because we need to vaccinate people. Since they're unavoidably unsafe, then you can't sue them. So we have a situation where somehow the vegan movement has, from my point of view, has really failed to make this point clear. A lot of people who are vegans go right along with the big pharma's narrative, especially during COVID and during this whole thing, talking about how we should go along with these shots and injections, when in fact it's fairly obvious that when you inject toxins right into a body without even any giving the regular digestive system or something a chance to help, it just goes right into the bloodstream. Then you have a situation where you're going to maximize illness. And the interesting thing, really, when you go back historically, is you look back maybe 120, 130 years ago with Rockefeller and this massive amount of wealth that was concentrated in the hands of like one or two people through petroleum, that if you process petroleum into petrochemicals, you make a lot more money on that petroleum when you process it into petrochemicals. And so the amount of petrochemicals that are now spewed, there's over 80 or 90,000 different petrochemicals that are used, sprayed on fields to kill pests, so-called pests, and used in all kinds of products as flame retardants and all kinds of things. So all these toxic chemicals go out into the world, and then our bodies accumulate them. And then we have cancer and neurodegenerative diseases and all kinds of hormonal problems, and everything comes from these chemicals. And so then people get sick, and then they go to the doctor, and Rockefeller has took over through the Flexner report that was back in the 1910s. Basically, the training of doctors is all in how to diagnose disease in terms of pharmaceuticals. Because if you distill and process petrochemicals one step further, you have pharmaceuticals, right? So it's all petroleum. basically all petroleum. It's petroleum, and petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals. It's all petroleum. And so they're putting petroleum into people and making them sick, and it's just maximizing. A patient cured is a patient lost. That's the last thing you want to do, is have anyone be healthy. That would destroy the whole thing. So they've just created many ways to get these toxins into us, and we need to understand that, right? It's not about being paranoid. It's just understanding the logic involved, and that in many ways we are in a war. I mean, that we are being attacked by forces that make money on us being less healthy. And the other thing that I think is important is for us as vegans in this movement to not use lies to promote the truth of veganism. That's one of the things I think is a big problem. I mean, there's so much in this new book. It's a long book. It's actually longer than the World Peace Diet, and I tried to really keep it condensed, but it's 370 pages. And so I go into some of the other narratives besides the medical narrative, which most vegans don't question. I mean, really, quite honestly, raw vegans very often do. I have to say, the raw vegans are much more savvy. But a lot of the vegans who are like in it for the animals, as soon as they get something, they go to the doctor and they take pharmaceuticals that are tested on animals. Come on. I mean, we should be really questioning this narrative, I think. But another one is eugenics. I talk about this in the book, eugenics, which basically, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, but most people don't realize that eugenics was a big movement in the early part of last century, in the 1920s and 30s. A lot of laws were passed to force sterilize people of the wrong race, or that they weren't that smart, or whatever it was. You just forced sterilize. So Indiana, I think 25, 30 states had laws on the books to force sterilize people, because there was this whole idea that we need to have only the best. And this it came straight. The people that were running it were animal agriculturists. They were the same people because that's one of the things I've realized in this research for this new book, is that science is basically a product of animal agriculture. Science is a product of animal agriculture. The very first science, go back 10,000 years, when we first started owning animals as property for food. We started herding cows and sheep and goats way back. The first science was figuring out how to manipulate these animals and breed them to maximize fur and milk and flesh, because that was profitable. And so we developed this whole view of dominating and exploiting nature, dominating and exploiting female animals. That's what science came out of. And it's the same today. Science is not any different. Science is about predicting and controlling and dominating nature, and it's based on materialism. And it does not make our life better. I mean, we really need to understand this, because science is being held up, like technology is being held up as the hope for humanity. That we will somehow, the scientists will save us. They'll come up with new ways to make our lives more comfortable and more happy. We have to understand that what has science done for cows and pigs and chickens? Are their lives any better now? No, they're much worse. They went from being just imprisoned in large areas to being imprisoned in smaller areas, to being hyper-confined, to being genetically mutilated. I mean, their lives have become more and more hellish directly because of science. And it's the same thing with us. The only positive future for humanity is through spiritual awakening. Spirituality and science are opposites. They really are opposites. Science is satanic in its basic orientation. We have to understand it. Science is satanic in its orientation, and it looks at life as matter, and it's based on a fundamental separation of the individual from the world, and how I can manipulate the world. So we really need to get very clear about this. That technology, for all of how it lures us in with things, we need, like Gandhi said, appropriate technology. Don't let the technology run us. Don't let technocrats run us and tell us how to live our lives, because that's what's happening. And the pharmaceutical medical complex and science in general, it's all about concentrating power in the hands of a few. Science works very well to do that, and to be able to survey people and watch and control people and create a prison system where just a few people can watch and control everybody else. So this is really the situation we have to understand is developing. Just what we've done to cows and pigs and chickens is happening to us in the same way. And so this idea of eugenics, of breeding animals, and so we want to breed people. But now what they're talking about, and the World Economic Forum, you've probably heard of Yuval Noah Harari and these other people, they're right up front about it. They say, what do we need all these humans for? I mean, we can run everything now, and pretty soon in the next 10 or 20 years through AI and robotics, we don't need humans. Humans don't have any purpose, really. I mean, we try to keep people maybe for, keep them entertained or to do menial tasks. But really, the basic idea, they're saying it directly, that eugenics is going to be used so that there'll be a master class and there'll be a slave class. And the slave class will be like we do with cows and pigs and chickens. We have scientists working all the time to try to dumb down cows and sheep and pigs so they can just sit in a cage, hyper confined, and get fat and not bang their heads against the walls and not be driven crazy. You want to dumb them down as much as possible. And so we have fluoride, which is put into the water to dumb people down, to disconnect us. And we have foods and we have pharmaceuticals, they're all intended to dumb us down. And not only that, besides that, the whole thing is, like Bill Gates has been saying, really right publicly, that we need to reduce the population. There's too many people. We need to cull the herd. And so in 1974, the Kissinger report came out, and it's been official U.S. policy since 1974 to reduce world population. There's too many people. And again, vegans jump on board with that. Oh yeah, there's too many people. And there's this underlying, there's this hatred of humanity, this idea that we have to get rid of people. And I think we need to realize we need to love humanity. We need to love human beings and not look at ourselves as a cancer on the earth. What we're doing is harmful, obviously, to the ecosystems, but it's animal agriculture that's harmful, not us. It's the thing that's destroying the planet is the fact that we have billions of cows and pigs and chickens and factory farm fish, and we're trying to feed them. And if we would go vegan, we could easily have, a lot more people, 10, 12, we don't know, 20 billion people, and we could live on a fraction of the land. Right now, even with the number of people we have, 8 billion, we actually live on only 1% of the land. I mean, that's well understood. Towns and cities are 1% of the land area of planet Earth. So I think we need to question these violent narratives. The other one is climate change. There's this basic idea that anthropogenic, like we are causing climate change. I mean, that is a narrative that's very toxic, very harmful, because, and vegans love that. We jump on that. Oh yeah, because, and it's true. I mean, if you have animal agriculture, it's harmful to forests, for sure. It's harmful to ecosystems. But we don't even talk about that. We only talk about climate change. We don't talk about the fact that animal agriculture is destroying the soil, and it's destroying aquifers, and it's overfishing the oceans, and it's cutting down rainforests. I mean, all of that is pretty much ignored in the narrative, and we focus on one little thing and say climate change. Why? Because with climate change, you can lock people down. That's the whole reason. That's why climate change is so promoted. The United Nations has said there's two things that we cannot allow anyone to question, that misinformation cannot be tolerated. One is vaccines, and one is anthropogenic climate change. Those two things you cannot question. So there's a massive, what's referred to as the censorship industrial complex. Massive. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of organizations that work on many different levels to censor free speech and not allow anyone to question forced medication and not question climate change. Because when you have climate change, then you have this narrative that, well, you can't burn fossil fuels because they go up into the air and they make it hotter somehow. I mean, first of all, climate scientists don't agree on that. I mean, they haven't never agreed on that. I used to believe it. I have to say, I was gullible enough to believe it from when Al Gore came out in 2006, and he said, in 10 years, the ice caps will have melted. Well, he was wrong about everything. Miami will be underwater. All these, fear porn he was spewing out in 2006. None of it ever happened. But I believed it. All the good vegans all believed it, and we all talked about how we have to reduce our climate footprint. And I gave talks at the Unitarian churches. We have to reduce our climate footprint and go vegan. And I realize now it's satanic. It's really evil, because the underlying idea is that carbon dioxide is a bad thing. Carbon dioxide is our best friend. Every growing tree, every growing vegetable, every growing fruit can only grow when there's carbon dioxide. And there's such a tiny amount in the atmosphere. 0.04% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. We do not want to reduce carbon dioxide. We want more carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is how you have life. So there's this narrative that burning fossil fuels is harmful because of climate change, and anyway, in my book I go into the whole thing that this is not true. But it's interesting, because what we have is several things. Number one, we have the fact that we are harming forests, and forests really are important to healthy ecosystems and to weather patterns. Forests are like, they send water up in and create clouds. And so if you cut down forests, you're not going to have clouds, you're going to disrupt rain. So there's no question about that. That's obviously true. But the idea that burning fossil fuels somehow warms the climate, that's never been shown. Or even that the greater levels of carbon dioxide in the environment are connected to higher temperatures. And so it's very interesting. I don't know I really researched ClimateGate, which, back in, I think it was 2009, and then again in 2011, how the IPCC, which is the Department of the United Nations, which really focuses on climate change, how they got caught red-handed in their emails to each other, lying, saying how we have to just cover this up, and we want to make it look like this. And but the media is completely owned, and so it was all suppressed. But once you start looking, and I started doing some in about 2016, I started to question climate change, and I'm so glad I did, because I realized, I started reading book after book after book, and I began to realize, oh my gosh, it's the same thing that happened with the animals. Same thing that happened with tobacco. It's like you have an industry that controls the science. It happened with tobacco. It happened with meat. You have the meat, dairy, and egg industries control the scientists. And it's very hard to get truth out into the mainstream media about how healthy plant-based organic food is. You still have these, Harvard coming out with these studies saying organic food isn't any healthier than non-organic. They just want people sick. And it's the same thing. They want people afraid of the climate. So another thing we have to understand is that there's geoengineering, right? There's so-called chemtrails going on, and so there's weather warfare is going on. Weather warfare is a thing. President Lyndon Johnson said way back in 1962, "He who controls the weather will control the world." And the Army has been working on this, the military and the Department of Energy. And so you can see, just look up into the sky, and you'll see these plumes that come from airplanes. And when they're analyzed, and people have analyzed this, geoengineeringwatch.org is a good website for this, strontium, barium, and aluminum, these nanoparticles. And those can be used in conjunction with these ionospheric heaters like HAARP in Alaska. And they have them on boats and on trains and all over the place. And these shoot millions of volts of energy into the upper atmosphere, ionosphere. And it's well understood that they can create a heat dome and create a drought. They can move storms around. They can create hurricanes. They can do what's called chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding, and make it snow when it's only 40 degrees, giant hailstorms, all these kinds of things. And then reliably they can say, oh, it's climate change. it's everything is climate change. And you can have the United Nations guys saying global boiling. There's so much to this. And the way they measure the Temperatures has changed because of the heat island effect. Back 50, 100, 200 years ago, there were not that many cities. The cities were not that big. Now, and it's well known that urban areas are hotter. They're warmer because of all this asphalt and pavement. And so now they're collecting the temperatures there instead of out like they did in the fields and forests where it's cooler. And so it gives this illusion that it's much hotter. I mean, it goes on and on. The other thing that's really interesting too, there's so many angles to this, but there was an explosion of this underwater volcano in February of 2022, Hunga Tonga volcano in the South Pacific, 450 feet below the surface of the ocean. This massive volcanic eruption, it sent millions of metric tons of water vapor into the atmosphere. Water vapor is the primary global thermostat. That does cause global warming. When you put a lot of water vapor up, it does heat up the climate of the whole planet. That's understood. And so scientists back then said, for the next 4 or 5 years, it's definitely going to be warmer because of that. But nobody talks about that when they say, oh, we have climate, it's warmer now. Yeah, well, we had this volcano. I mean, it's going to be warmer for a few years until that naturally goes back into the atmosphere again and back to the oceans. So we have all these things. And it's vegans are so, unfortunately, tend to be so gullible because we want to believe that we can change, we can get people to stop eating meat if we scare them with the climate thing. We'll say anything. I remember I used to say that all the time. Well, methane, cow farts and cow burps, it's 30 times or 70 times more of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, And I mean, it's all baloney. If the bacteria in the cow's stomach that make the methane, which is CH4. It's just carbon and hydrogen. I mean, it's going to eventually become carbon dioxide. It's going to eventually be taken up by plants, and it's going to help the forest to grow. It's good stuff. And if the cows did not eat that grass, and the bacteria in their stomach didn't turn it into methane, then the bacteria on the earth, in the autumn, when the grass turns brown, the bacteria would do the same thing and turn it into methane. It's going to go into methane anyway, but we lie. I mean, people don't realize they're lying, but we allow ourselves to repeat all these lies and say that, oh, methane is much worse, and cows cause it. And now Bill Gates has this new thing. He got a new vaccine he's going to give to cows to make them stop farting, right? And so to fight climate change. But the point we have to understand is that if you want to imprison cows and pigs and chickens, what do? You take away their ability to move. That's called slavery. If you can't go somewhere, you're locked down. That's slavery. That is the definition of slavery. And so climate change is exactly the same thing they're talking about, and they're actually instituting and implementing 15-minute cities in countries all over the United States, Canada, Europe, all over the world. They're going for 15-minute cities where you cannot go more than 15 minutes from your house. You're going to be locked down more and more, and people are saying, yes, we need to do it for climate change. We need to give up our freedom to travel. Freedom to travel is a big deal. If you're not allowed to go, I mean, that's the worst thing you can do to a free living animal. It happened here on our land. We have a little garden, and a deer somehow got in through a fence. The preliminary fence we put up was nylon. The deer never came in, but later we had to put a metal fence up because when she came in through the gate somehow, and then she realized she was trapped, she smashed the fence down. She just broke the nylon fence down. And so we had to we put up a metal one. But the whole idea is the worst thing you can do to a free living being is to try to confine their body and not let them go anywhere. But that's what we're willing to have done to us because we're being brainwashed by climate change, brainwashed into thinking that we can't drive or fly or go anywhere because of climate change. We have to understand, what is really the narrative. And people say, well, but it's the petroleum companies, they don't want us to believe in this. And I mean, we have to understand the same people that own the petroleum companies, they own the solar panel companies, they own the lithium ion battery companies, they own all the companies, they own everything. They don't care. I mean, they're going to make their money, and it takes more petroleum to make a Tesla car, because it takes massive amounts of heavy metals and mining. It takes much more petroleum to make a Tesla car than the petroleum that would be burned by a regular car in an entire lifetime. So they're selling more petroleum than ever, making these big windmills that take massive amounts of petroleum to make them, and they only have a limited lifespan. They're gonna have to make more. So it's all like, you have to understand. We can't be. I call it in my new book, toxic gullibility. We have to learn not to believe what the authorities are saying, not to go along with the groupthink and just believe whatever the authorities tell us, the technocrats. We have to realize that we are livestock to them. And so the way forward is through joy, self-sufficiency, being responsible for our own health, being responsible for the quality of our food, growing our own food, being responsible for the quality of our information, like alternative, like this, right now, what you guys are doing, alternative narratives, we need that, because the opposite of that is this centralized, this is how it is, you have to eat our food, you have to believe our information, you have to use our energy. That's the slave state. So veganism has always been about kindness and compassion for animals and for each other and for ecosystems. And it's always been about freedom. It's about freedom for animals and freedom for all living beings. And it's always been about questioning official narratives. So we're called to question the official narratives, to honor and respect the sovereignty of all living beings, including human beings, and to defend our rights. Because if we don't have rights of assembly, of travel, of speech, of worship, of media and the press, we have no way to defend animals. We can't even defend ourselves. And vegans have made a huge mistake in going along with the toxic, violent narratives of the COVID era and the pandemic, and being willing to wear face masks, which block our spirit. I mean, these face diapers are pure satanic violence. It's what you do. If you want to shut people down, you block the breath. The word for breath, the Latin word for breath is spirit. The word spiritus is spiritus. Blocking the spiritus of people, they can't smile, we can't talk, we can hardly hear each other. We're recycling our own toxins. I mean, it's amazing that we actually went along with that. When you understand that there's 4 ways that our bodies have of expelling toxins through the urine, the feces, the skin, and the breath, and of those 4, 80% of toxins go out through our breath. And I'm talking about serious toxins. Deadly toxins are going out through our breath that have to go out. And when you put a mask on, people make themselves so sick with these masks. I mean, not just physically sick, but spiritually sick. And children's IQs plummeted because they saw these masked people around. I mean, it's really satanic. This whole thing has been satanic, and it was a test to see how far they could push us. And I'm afraid to say we failed the test. They pushed us way too far. I mean, I saw that already with 9/11. It's like, people are going to believe this baloney? If they think that we all believe that a little plane, which if a plane hits a flock of geese, the whole thing gets dented up. It's like that a plane could cause these concrete towers to just dissolve into powder. I mean, when we didn't question that, I think they knew that we won't question anything. And they could roll out this whole farce and have people not question it and lock each other down and wear face masks. We better never do that again. And the vaccine, these injections have been really terrible, what they've done to people. And it's well understood. In fact, I have to say, one of the most well-known people in the vegan movement, who actually used my book in the training that this person was giving, because I wasn't vaccinated, they stopped using my book. They were mad at me for for speaking out against the vaccines. They got vaccinated. They got terribly sick. all kinds of neuropathy and everything else, and then cancer. And I just talked to them on the phone, and they said, you know what? You were right. I was wrong. Those vaccines are terrible. My body's not the same. And your book is now again in my in my training. So, I mean, that's a wonderful person who most people can never admit that they were wrong. We need to admit we're wrong. I admit I was wrong about climate change. I admit I was wrong about eugenics and depopulation. I used to say the same thing. Oh, you have too many people, and climate change. It's all caused by animal agriculture. We need to admit we're wrong, and we need to love humanity, and we need to question the globalist agenda of depopulation and climate change, and having people eat insects and cannibalism. I mean, they're talking about having people eat other people for climate change. That's been some major studies in European universities that we should eat. When someone dies, you should eat them, right? I mean, they're mocking humanity the same way we mock cows and pigs and chickens. We make fun of them as we kill them and eat them. So we need to really understand that veganism is the path forward, because it's giving to others what we would like for ourselves. It's being loving and kind to those who are at our mercy. And when we do that, then we're worthy of love and peace and harmony for ourselves. But if we don't, we're going to get the leaders that reflect us. We are, from the point of view of cows and pigs and chickens, we are satanic torturers. We are. And we have to understand that and stop it as a society. And then and the beautiful thing is there's nothing stopping us. I mean, there's a pathway ahead of a beautiful future for our children and grandchildren. There's nothing stopping it except for animal agriculture and the lies that are being used to enslave us. So we need to question these lies, that animals are here for us to use, anthropogenic climate change, and everything that takes away our freedom and freedom of speech, and allow ourselves to really talk about things and question science, because it's well understood. I'll wrap up here. I know I'm going too long here, but it's essential that we understand that science has been corrupted, history has been corrupted, the academia has been corrupted. It's up to us to discover the truth. And in the ancient wisdom teachings of the world's traditions, there were people with tremendous wisdom who attained extremely high levels of consciousness and happiness and joy and health. And we have the same thing within us. Our technology is making us comfortable and disconnecting us from nature. We need to reconnect with nature, reconnect with the beauty of nature and the beauty of animals and our beauty of our own mind and consciousness, and resist the technocratic narrative that's pushing us into trusting science, because that's the way of slavery. We need to get back the spiritual power that is always within our consciousness and see that there's one life living through all of us. And when we bless others, we bless ourselves. When we harm others, we harm ourselves. And it's our gullibility, which is really the problem. It's an old saying, you cannot fool an honest person. We're not honest. We're deceiving ourselves, and so we're easily deceived. We need to be honest, and then we'll not be deceived. Right now, most vegans and everybody are being deceived because we're really not honest. So we need to meditate and discover our true nature and live from that. And when we do that, then we won't be deceived anymore. We'll be able to see the lies for what they are. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Will. The truth will set us all free, and it's freedom that we're all looking for, and Food for Freedom teaches us that. And I recognize all you listeners, there's going to be many people that are going to find this conversation very controversial, but part of freedom of speech is our ability to look at things openly from all sides. And so I invite you to really do that with this sharing. And spirituality and our right to connect with our divine light is the only thing that will bring humanity up to a certain level of truth. Because what I hear you say is that truth cannot be found through science. It cannot be found through media. It cannot be found through the
No.
practices of our culture. But when we connect deeply within the truth, and nature guides us there quite frequently, and spending time there again and just watching the way nature naturally takes care of itself, and allowing, you know, as I say at the end of every one of my writings, I dedicate my gratitude to Mother Earth, who keeps lending her microbial forgiveness. And thank you all for listening, and understand that part of what Will is saying is that it's the terrain, not the germ. And when we take really good care of our inner garden, our inner earth, and connect that with the outer earth, and collect our happy, healthy microbes through food as freedom, we can gather enough brain sovereignty. Because of that gut-brain connection, we are all losing our sovereignty. We are losing our ability to think clearly, because most of us have leaky, inflamed guts. And so that direct connection to our brain. So please, listeners, open your mind and your spirit and your heart to this information, as controversial as you find it. Take the pearls of wisdom, but especially do what every spiritual practice has done forever. And they say to question everything. Without our ability to question, just because we were brainwashed in school, to listen and to memorize, and to become, starting in that very, very young theta state, that hypnotic state, we're told to memorize and listen and behave. I was
Please the authority, right?
Yes, don't question authority. And I was one of the fortunate ones. I would have been put on medication if maybe it was
Right.
but I was told I daydreamed a lot, and I was easily distracted in school. And it was because simply I couldn't follow the narrative. I couldn't, there's just something inside of my belly and inside of my spirit that couldn't hear it. I just couldn't hear it. I was such an intuitive child, and I felt that there was something wrong right from the beginning when our teacher was able to hit us across the hand with her yardstick. And so I got lost in the cursive letters along the edge, and I learned to write when I was in grade 1, handwriting, and I found my way through it in the forests, growing up in a forest with rivers, bears, Hollywood,
Trees.
and
Yeah.
trees. Yeah. So thank you, Will, for being on here. And again, I invite our listeners, understanding that we're part of a larger community of Million Vegan Grandmothers and also climate healers, that there's going to be stuff that you might not agree on in this podcast, but I ask you to do what all of us are doing as we're just walking each other home, is to listen with an open heart, to read Food is Freedom, Food for
Yeah, it's in
Freedom.
here. I couldn't do it. It's much more with citations and everything. So it's in the
Great.
book. Much better.
Great. So continue on with your questioning everything and opening yourself up. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.